Perek Lo Yachpor, Daf Chav Daled, sponsored the Refuah Shalema for Yehuda Chaim ben Esther Sarah. The Gemara brings another case from a Mishnah to prove Rabbi Chanina's principle, Rov v'karov, hochin achar harov. A woman who finds blood in her vaginal canal is tameh. It is assumed to have originated in her uterus, even though there is another source, the upper chamber. Abaya holds this proves Rabbi Chanina's principle. Even though the upper chamber is closer to the vaginal canal, most blood originates in the uterus. Rava disagrees. He holds there is an additional factor to attribute the blood to the uterus. Blood is more prevalent in the uterus. Perhaps quantity alone would not decide her state of tumah. Rabbi Chia states a similar law. A woman entered the temple confines or touched truma unaware of the presence of vaginal blood, must bring a sacrifice and the truma must be burned. Rava deduces three conclusions. Number one, majority outweighs proximity. Number two, following a majority is a biblical requirement. Number three, the ruling to follow majority is even where dalsos medina neulos. This expression teaches us majority rules even with one rov. One who finds meat in a town where most of the butcher shops are kosher can eat the meat even though this majority cannot be combined with another majority, namely, most of the meat entering the town is kosher. Concerning a woman, there is no outside source of blood in that area. Rava eventually retracted his rejection to Abaya's proof. The Gemara attempts to claim Rav and Shmuel argue about Rabbi Chanina's principle. A barrel of wine of unknown origin was found floating in a river opposite a city with a majority Jewish population in an overall area of Gentiles. Rav held the wine was kosher. Shmuel disagreed. The Gemara initially understood they argued about Rabbi Chanina's principle. However, the Gemara concluded they argued whether the current of the river was strong enough to prevent the barrel from being obstructed along the way. The Gemara attempts to bring more proofs for Rabbi Chanina. Number one, a barrel of wine was found hidden in a vineyard of Arla. The owner did not know about the barrel either because it was stolen or it was brought from another vineyard. The majority of vineyards were not Arla. Ravina permitted drinking the wine. The Gemara explained his reason was not that he relied on Rov. He assumed thieves would not chance hiding the stolen barrel there while workers were pressing wine. However, hidden grapes found in this vineyard are assumed to be Arla. Number two, Rava permitted drinking wine from bags found in a Jew's vineyard. Initially, the Gemara assumed he disagreed with Rabbi Chanina since most of the population of that area was Gentile. However, the Gemara answered, Jews in that area bagged most of the wine for sale. However, this applied only to large bags unless small bags were found together with them. Now we move on to a new Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the laws of urban zoning. The immediate area surrounding a city was left open to give it an aesthetic appearance. Therefore, one had to distance planting a tree from the edge of a city 25 amos. If there were large like sycamore or carob or non-fruit-bearing trees, they were distanced 50 amos. The law taught in another Mishnah, Ein osin sada migrash, the lo migrash sadeh, teaching one cannot plant anything within the 1,000 amma open area that borders a city, does not apply to our Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer holds it applies only to Levite cities. The Rabbanan hold it applies only to plants, not to trees. The Gemara proves this distinction from the law of carrying in a karpaf, a large enclosed area on Shabbos. As long as the karpaf was enclosed for residential purposes, it was permitted to carry there. A brisa teaches planted mostly with trees, as opposed to plants, maintains its residential status. If the city was built before the tree was planted, the owner cannot claim compensation for cutting down the tree. If the tree existed before the city, he can demand compensation for cutting it down. If it is unclear, it is cut down without compensation to the owner. The Gemara distinguishes between a tree planted within 25 amos of his neighbor's pit and a tree planted illegally outside the city limits. The owner of the tree can demand compensation from the pit owner before cutting it down, whereas he cannot demand compensation from the city residents until he cuts it down. If uncertain as to whether the tree was planted before the pit, the burden of proof is on the pit owner to force the tree owner to cut it down. However, if uncertain whether the tree was planted before the city, the burden of proof is on the tree owner. Only a tree planted illegally next to a pit must be cut down. Therefore, when in doubt, the burden of proof is on the pit owner. However, even if a tree was planted before the city, the tree must be cut down. Therefore, when in doubt, the burden of proof is on the tree owner. Now we move on to a new Mishnah. Number one must distance his permanent granary from the city 50 amos, and on his property 50 amos in all directions. The wind-blown chaff can injure people or destroy plants by drying them out. Number two, one must distance it from his neighbor's saplings and from his plowed field, bichdei shelo yazik, not to do damage. The chaff over-fertilizes the field. The Gemara questions the difference between the two distances of the Mishnah. Abaya answers the second, shir bichdei shelo yazik, refers to a temporary granary, one where a winnowing shovel is not used. He does not have to distance 50 amos because the chaff does not fly as far. Rav Ashi answers that it is not a different distance. It simply explains why one has to distance his granary 50 amos.